Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Thank you for taking the time out of your busy day to join us for a very special webinar featuring Mojo Enforce, which is our new integration with Google for Education. Before we get started, I would like to run through a few housekeeping items. All of the attendees today are on mute. So what that means, if at any time you have a question for our presenter, Robin, you can please submit them through the Q&A function on that GoToWebinar panel, or the chat window works. Any questions will be held until the end of this presentation, at which point we'll ask them in the order that we've received. I would now like to introduce today's presenter, Robin Jellum. He's the Director of Technical Marketing at Mojo Networks. Robert is an expert in wireless networking, having been in the industry for 30 years, with roles spanning from engineering to support and marketing. Today, Robin will be talking about the rapidly changing needs and issues faced by IT and education today, and how really there is no way for schools to ensure that only authorized devices are connecting to their Wi-Fi network. So with our new unique technology which allows only registered devices to connect to your network using our integration with Google for Education. Mojo Enforce references the registered device list on the Google Cloud to validate authentication sessions above and beyond PSK or 8021X. So without any further delay, I'm going to go ahead and pass the floor to Robin, who will begin today's presentation.
Great, thank you, Erica, and thanks everyone for joining. This is going to be a fairly short presentation, so please ask questions. It might be a little technical. I try to keep it light, but I want to make sure all questions get answered. So today's topic is really about how do you really secure a school network. One of the challenges is that one of the great things that Google's done in the last few years is that they have created a program for schools. And this is part of the paradigm shift of schools and learning. Schools are becoming much more digitally savvy and using digital media for sharing and collaboration. And Google has really taken on the mantle of pushing this forward by providing G Suite for Education. And G Suite's their new term. It used to be Google Apps for Education. And so what Google has done is made this free for qualifying schools. So with G Suite for Education and with the advent of tablets and Chromebooks, which are increasingly more inexpensive, with the new classroom models of flipped classrooms where the lectures are being recorded and watched at home, and students come into the classroom and it's much more collaborative and sharing and a more holistic approach to learning. All of that has summed up to a greater reliance on wireless networking and use of the internet. And so one of the biggest challenges is how do we keep those things as secure as possible? We want to keep the kids safe. So one of the things that's really pushed us forward, like I said, is G Suite for Education. Google has, I think the estimates of school adoptions is 50 million users by 2016. So this year, they should have 50 million users. And by 2020, that should be 110 million users. So this is an explosive growth for school systems and the suite of apps, which is pretty all-encompassing. So it's really making schools much more collaborative and at a cost-efficient price point. The other advantage of not just G Suite for Education is that Chromebooks have really come on and taken up a strong position in school systems. So the two major usages of devices in schools are Chromebooks and tablets. And the Chromebook advantage, I'm just showing some graphs here, I'm not going to go into detail on this, but you can look this up. IDC did a research study on this a couple years ago and showed that the advantage of Chromebooks is that they're actually, the overall total cost of ownership is much less expensive than traditional laptops or PCs or even tablets. Because of the integration with G Suite for Education, there's less management overhead, it's much more secure, the platforms are more robust and solid, and it's much easier to deploy. Once you get things set up, it's very easy to set up and manage your school systems with Chromebooks or tablets. So this all sounds great. You know, we've got free G Suites for Education, we've got Chromebooks, which are are solid and easy to deploy. So what's the downside? Well, the downside is that there's more reliance on the network and wireless, and there's a spot between the Wi-Fi and Google where there's a security risk. So Wi-Fi is typically a user-based authentication method, and I'll talk more about that in just a minute. But the credentials you use to get on the wireless network are really shareable credentials. Username and password, you can give those to anybody. The pre-shared key, you can give that to, once you know it, you can hand that to anybody. So that's a security risk. And then Google, they can control the device, but the problem is there's really no influence over the wireless network or the network at all. So, so there's a little bit of a challenge. So the challenge is that there's this management hole. You know, Google can manage the devices, the network can manage access, but you can have a device that is valid on the network because it has the right credentials, but isn't managed by Google. So now you have this unauthorized device on the network, and this can be a security risk. And this could be a couple different ways. One is could be BYOD. You know, many students now have multiple devices. They have their own tablet, they have smartphones, and with the shareable devices, they can get on the network. And since those credentials are shareable, it wouldn't be that hard for somebody else to get those credentials and to get on the school network and to do things that are unwanted, let's say. So just a little bit of details about the network authentication. There's two main ways that devices are authenticated to get on the network. The first one is called pre-shared key, and this is by far the most prominent one. It's easiest to do. You come up with a key. The same device uses the same key. It's very easy to administrate, but because that key is used everywhere and on every device, it's pretty easy to share. And because it's the same key for everyone, you can't really tell who's using it on which device. So you can't restrict things by device by pre-shared key. The other mechanism, which is a little more robust, is called 802.1x. And this is really a username and password mechanism. This requires individual credentials, but it requires some more infrastructure. So typically it requires a radius server and some sort of LDAP server. Sorry for the acronyms. The radius server is the authentication server, and the LDAP server is a directory server. So it's where you keep the directory servers, where you keep your usernames and passwords, and that's the radius server talks to the LDAP server or Active Directory. There are many different flavors of LDAP. So by going to radius, it does the authentication of the device through the LDAP, and then once the user has been authenticated, they can get on the network. The challenge with that is it's pretty complex. You have to have a radius server, you have to have LDAP or some directory service. You have to have them set up. They're typically hardware devices. They can be cloud-based or VM-based. But you have to set all these things up and you have to maintain them. The other downside of that is still, you really can't restrict the device. Once you have a username and password, you can go to another device and log in with the username and password. So the same holes apply. So that's the downside of the network side. The downside of Google, while Google is great, you know, in Google G Suite for Education, you can set up your organizational structure, you can set up the device management, and you can set up user management, but you can't, and so you can restrict things by account, you can restrict things by device, but it doesn't work with the network. So what we're trying to do here is bridge the gap. How do we restrict the network to only registered devices? So Google allows you registered devices, the network allows you user-based authentication, but you can use an unauthorized device with a valid user authentication to get on the network and do nasty things. So what we're trying to talk about here today is Mojo Enforce, which bridges that gap. So what are really the challenges of unauthorized devices? Okay, so somebody gets, a kid brings in their iPad, their personal iPad, and they get on the network. Well, what are the real challenges? Well, you know, you can lock things down, you can make the network restrictive so they can't get to too many things, but there are other impacts. You can't really control what activities are being done on those devices. So you may be able to restrict the websites they get to, but they could have games on the device and they can be playing games in class. Because these devices are unknown, they're a risk, and so IT, it's a distraction to IT. They're having to spend time and resources trying to figure out where these devices are, what applications are being used. It puts more stress on the network, because if you're doing a lot of streaming of content to valid websites, it still takes up bandwidth, which bandwidth can be very precious in a classroom environment where a valid learning session may be using video, but if somebody is watching some other video and hogging the bandwidth because there's a limited resource on the access point, that can cause a bad impact on the valid application. So, and it's just unsafe, right? It's just another thing on the network that's a hole in the network. So we really want to be able to control that. So together, Google and Mojo integration, we kind of married these two things together. With Mojo Enforce, we can take the device and user list from Google, apply it to Mojo Wireless, and restrict the devices on the network to only authorized devices. So the way this works is, in Google, you set up your devices, you set up your organization, you set up your users, and then you set up an API tunnel between Google and Mojo. So once that's set up, once the API connection is set up, Mojo will go and query Google for the device list. It will then download that device list to each access point on your Mojo network. And once that's synced, it can restrict devices that get onto the network. So, like I said, so once your network is set up, once the API connection is set up and the device list is set up, when a device comes on the network, it connects to the access point. It goes through the authentication process, either PSK or 802.1x, and once it's been authenticated, the access point looks up the MAC address of the client and determines whether it's a valid device on the network or not. If it's not a valid device, a couple things can be done. You can actually just disconnect it so it can't get on, or you can assign it to a role, which will then, you can do various things with that role. So, for example, if this is you don't know if this is going to be an authorized device or not, you can redirect that device to a registration website so they can get this to be an enrolled device. Or you can put it to a guest SSID where you can have some control over it. If the device is on the network and it's authorized, then it goes through the whole, it's valid, it gets the role of the valid role for that device. I'm sorry, I'm mixing my words here. So for example, if this is a teacher device, if the user that logs in as a teacher, you can get a teacher role and they can have certain accesses. If it's a K through 3 tablet, based on that role, they can get restricted access to certain things. So once you've validated the device, it goes through the standard authentication and restriction process set up on your network. So the real benefits are that, you know, with Mojo, you can, with the standard wireless authentication mechanisms, PSK or 802.1x, you can validate users, but those credentials are shareable. With Google, you can validate devices. With the integration of the two, you can actually validate the devices on the Mojo network, so only valid devices can get on the network. So the real advantages are, this is actually fairly easy to set up. There's a lot of steps to setting up the API and getting things set up correctly, but we have a step-by-step guide that'll walk you through each step to get you set up. The real value here is, okay, so Google for GC for Education is free to qualified schools. Well, Mojo Enforce is also free. It comes free with your Mojo network. So there's really no cost. The only cost to all of this is the Chromebook or tablet registration fee, which comes as part of the purchase process for this device. So with this integration, you now have the security of the wireless network, you have the security of managed devices, and you have the ability to make sure that only authorized devices get onto your network. So to complete this whole solution, and it's just a little call out again to Mojo, is okay, we've done all this out. Now we have the authorized devices on the network. There are other ways you can have devices get on your network that are authorized. For example, somebody could bring in an access point from home and plug it into the network. It's called a rogue access point. So you really need to have a complete solution, and part of that complete solution is WIPS, or Wireless Intrusion Prevention System. So with WIPS, which Mojo is the undisputed leader in this market space, you can allow own devices, you can allow it by role, teacher, student, staff, you can have guest access, you can prevent BYOD devices if they're not authorized. So there's lots of things that Mojo can do. So just to give a little bit better illustration here, there are essentially 3 classifications of access points and client devices. There's authorized, rogue, and external. So external is if you have access points in your school, those would be authorized. If you have some neighbor that has an access point that can be seen in school, that's called a neighbor device. That's an external device. But if you have somebody brings an access point into your network and plugs it into your network, that's called a rogue device, because that's not an authorized AP onto your network. So rogue is specifically an access point on your network that's not authorized. So when an authorized client talks to an authorized AP, that's perfect. That's exactly what you want. That's allowed. But what you don't want is any device talking to a rogue AP, whether it's authorized, rogue, or neighbor AP. You want to shut that down. You also don't want any neighbor client or rogue client connecting to an authorized AP. You want to shut that down. And you also don't want authorized clients talking to neighbor APs or even talking to other clients, other non-authorized clients. So Mojo Airtight, our WIPS platform, will block all of those mechanisms, so they can't get on the network, or they can't do unauthorized activities. And then finally, the thing is, we don't mess with neighbor APs. And this is where Mojo Airtight really shines, and where other vendor WIPS systems don't do very well. In fact, we just did a recent blog on a benchmark report that we did comparing our WIPS system to other popular WIPS systems. And one of the biggest challenges was being able to detect rogues on the network, and then being able to detect neighbors who aren't on your network. So I encourage you to go read that blog. I think it's entitled Peanut Butter and Chocolate, 2 great things that go together. So the most important thing is the place where you could get into trouble is if your WIPS system actually blocks your neighbor AP. That's actually FCC rule. That's breaking the law if you block some valid communication of your neighboring AP. So we really ignore anything from the neighboring AP, whether a rogue client talks to it or a neighbor client talks to it. We just disregard that because that's their business. So just to summarize the Mojo Airtight, Mojo Airtight is the most accurate classification and prevention system out there. We have multiple patents on it. We have a very unique feature called marker packets. Marker packets is how we do some of the stuff and do it so accurately, more accurately than anybody else can do. Everybody else has to use these complex rules and try to guess what's going on. With marker packets, we can tell exactly what's going on and shut things down, shut the right things down and let the right things through. Other people actually, many other vendors don't recommend turning on the prevention system. They'll have a detection system, but they don't recommend turning on the prevention system because they can't get it accurate enough, and they're liable to lawsuits if they turn it on. All right, that was quick. I hope that was informative. Are there any questions?
Yes, it looks like there were a couple questions here, Robin. One of the first ones that came in was around the client registrations, whether it's by MAC address, how they're registering clients.
So G Suite for Education has a registration process. It is by MAC address, but you actually have to, and Google's done a great job of documenting this. In fact, they've done such a great job. There's so much documentation out there, sometimes it's a little challenging to understand how to do that. But when you get a new Chrome device, you need to go and register it before you actually log into it, and that registers it with Google. And I'm not sure it's just by MAC address, but MAC address is certainly part of it.
Great, thank you. Another question, obviously, that came in was a link, if there was a link to the blog you had just mentioned. So I did post that in the chat window for everybody to reference. And then another question just came in here, Robin. Is it possible to have non-Chromebook devices and Chromebooks on one SSID with Mojo Enforce? So for instance, if the staff is using MacBooks and the students are using Chromebooks.
Yeah, they still need to be managed by if you're going to manage them via G Suite, you can manage non-Chromebook. You still have to be running Chrome, but you can manage other devices.
Great, thank you. Hopefully that answered your question, Jeremy. But again, I would like to open it up for any other questions now. And of course, you may have questions later, so you can always feel free to contact us, either Robin directly, and his email is here on the screen, robin.jellum@mojonetworks.com. And then also, you can always email us at Mojo Networks. And another question just came in, when is this being made available? So I can actually answer that now. It is currently available, Dustin. So I don't know if you have any additional comments, Robin, but Mojo Enforce is available currently with our product. Yeah,
it's available. It's ready to go. We've been testing it for a while. It's actually pretty cool. It's one of those little things that it was one of our product managers said, hey, this is something that needs to be done, and we did it. And as far as I know, we're the only ones out there with a solution that does this.
Great. Actually, two questions have come up around the dashboard, Robin. So people are asking if Enforce is available on the Aware dashboard.
Enforce is available on the Mojo Wireless Manager dashboard if you have 8.2 and later, which you should. So it should be
hopefully there. That answers. Hopefully that answers those couple questions. But for those, there are a couple of people, we can follow up with you afterwards as well to make sure that we connect you with one of our product engineers to get you set up and make sure that it's showing.
If you have any problems, please let us know.
Yes. And then another question around, are there any known issues, Robin, with Chromecast, Miracast, or printing from Chromebook? I guess this is in relation to Enforce.
I'm not a Chromebook expert. There shouldn't be, because as long as you set up your network correctly to be able to do those things, the network should be able to support all of that. There may be some configuration issues that need to be taken care of, but yeah, there should be no real challenges with it.
Great, thank you. Let's see, I'll give it just another second here for some questions, but I do want to thank everybody for attending and participating. Hopefully we've been able to answer any questions you have, and do not hesitate to contact Robin or just Mojo directly from our website for any additional questions around Mojo Enforce and how to get this product available today. So thank you, everyone, and we will also be following up with you to share some exciting new details around what we're offering K-12 and additionally what else Mojo Enforce can do for you. So thank you, everyone. Thank you, Robin, for the great presentation. We'll give you all 30 minutes back of your life and have a great holiday. Thank you.
Great, thank you.